makes you sick and overweight, making nearly 1 in 4 teenagers pre-diabetic. It's not fat. The answer is sugar.
Studies in rats, you find out that sugar is 8 times more addictive than cocaine.
A new study by the University of Texas at Dallas has found an unexpected connection between sugar and certain types of cancer.
Really, we've sort of been set up to be major addicts, if you will, of sugar, and so it can sort of put your mind a little bit at ease that not all of this is your fault.
The average American consumes about 152 pounds of sugar a year. That's roughly 22 teaspoons every single day.
Dr. Barry Horowitz says those increases are the result of a very real sugar high.
Sugar is like any other addictive drug. You get a temporary high and you crash.
In a recent study, 43 cocaine-addicted laboratory rats were given the choice of cocaine or sugar water over a 15-day period. 40 out of the 43 chose the sugar.
Food addiction is a real thing. It's not a metaphor. It's a biological fact. Studies show that your brain lights up with sugar just like it does with cocaine or heroin.
If they go to the cinema, and this is a small one, and there are big ones here too. You go to the cinema and you get a jug of Coke like this. Do you think people have any idea how much sugar's in it?
And maybe they don't.
So there really is such a thing as sugar addiction. The results of a study that came out back in August 2007, it was on 43 rats.
A clear relationship between sugar and cancer leads scientists to 2 conclusions. Sugar use contributes to cancer, and going without it can slow growth of the disease.
You're an expert nutrition doctor. Can you talk about sugar's role in cancer?
Cancer is an obligate glucose metabolizer, which means cancer is a sugar feeder. And so this has been known for about 70 years.
And these rats had a choice of choosing sugar water to consume or cocaine, and 94% of the rats chose the sugar water.
And our kids, they consume even more, 34 teaspoons every day. This is the reason that 70% of Americans and 40% of kids are overweight. And new science proves that sugar is biologically addictive.
What's on your dinner menu tonight? Anything that might be addictive to your children?
If you were thinking no, Roxanne Stein's going to show you why you might want to think again.
Processed food is much more powerful than we ever realized. For decades, we had the science to show that drugs of abuse can hijack the neural circuits to get us to come back for more and more.
And I think one of the things we need to do...
Look at this. 23 sachets of sugar in that single container, the equivalent thereof. Now that is a staggering amount of sugar, isn't it?
100 years ago, most folks consumed only 4 pounds of sugar a year. That's this much. Now, however, the average person takes in 40 times this amount, 160 pounds of sugar a year.
Otto Warburg won a Nobel Prize. He was an MD, PhD in Europe who found that clearly cancer cells are fermentative. They prefer burning sugar, glucose, and they have roughly 4 to 10 times the number of glucose receptors on their cell membranes.
Now, this addiction is not an emotional eating disorder. Sugar and flour, which actually raises your blood sugar more than table sugar, hijacks your taste buds, your brain chemistry, and your hormones and your metabolism. So the question is, how do you break the addiction?
Kristen Kujawski has had regular checkups with her endocrinologist for the past decade. Then she weighed more than 300 pounds. Kristen had an addiction.
I needed something sweet and caffeine every day, something, in a large amount of it.
Some of these rats were already previously cocaine addicted, and they switched from the cocaine to the sugar water. And what they also observed, the scientists, was that rats worked harder and went further out of their way to get the sugar water than they did the cocaine.
We now have science that show that you can make food hyper-palatable too, and that gets us to come back for more and more.
The Coke Classic, look at this one here. There's 44 packets of sugar in this one. 44!
Indeed there are.
Food manufacturers add enormous amounts of sugar, usually in the form of high fructose corn syrup, to products we consume all day, every day. Coffee drinks and cereal, soda and snacks. Even foods you wouldn't expect, like spaghetti sauce and peanut butter.
Therefore, what we find is diabetics, because they have elevated blood glucose, have a higher incidence of cancer. Elevated intake of white sugar, elevated blood glucose levels, even if you're not diabetic, increases the risk for cancer.
When something like this occurs, and I'm really referring to what appears to be a true addiction to sugar.
She's so addicted to sugars.
So you'll swing by on the way home and you'll pick up whatever she wants, pie.
Animal studies have been shown where they give the animals a diet that will induce low or normal or high levels of blood glucose with cancer, and they find it's a dose-dependent response.
The conclusion was that sugar is roughly 8 to 9 times more addictive than even cocaine, which is a pretty serious, major addictive drug.
Leptin. That allowed us to modulate our total food intake for 50,000 years or more. And then all of a sudden, in 30 years, the thing's broken seemingly beyond repair.
If you can lower blood glucose, the animals stay alive longer. So sugar and cancer are definitely linked in. They inject radioactively labeled glucose into the cancer patient's veins. Then they use a Geiger counter-like device to track where the sugar went, because that's where the cancer is, because cancer is a sugar feeder.
The starvation signal, which is clearly not working. And that's leptin. And leptin tells your brain you've had enough and you can burn energy properly. But when you don't get the leptin signal, your brain thinks it's starving.
Diabetes was actually going up faster than obesity was around the world. And that took me to the question of, was there something specific in the Western diet that was driving chronic metabolic disease? And that led me to sugar.
Pleasure is good, except that a lot of pleasure, as it turns out, is not. In the process of going for more pleasure, we have changed our dopamine system.